As if they don't have too much on their plates. The Kings of Combat Sports Podcast.
Brian Mann.
And wait, they'll talk about the things they did that day. They'll analyze the work of Vince and Triple H. Review-A-SmackDown. Review-A-SmackDown. SmackDown. Review-A-SmackDown. SmackDown. Review-A-SmackDown. SmackDown. Review-A-SmackDown.
Welcome everybody to Review-A-SmackDown. And joining me today, while John Pollock is still on secret assignment, is Keep It 2000's own social experimenter, Brian Mann. How are you doing, Brian?
I'm good. I think we just lost 200 listeners or so. People don't like me as much as they like Nate, unfortunately, but I'm sorry. I'm here, guys. I'm here today.
I think people just are used to familiarity. And
Yeah.
if I now that John's not here, everybody misses John. But I'll get hate. When John comes back, I'm sure he'll get plenty of hate too. So I think people are just always looking for a reason to complain. So fuck them. And you and I will have a great conversation. So anyway, how have you been, Brian?
I've been pretty great. Actually. I mean, I watched last night's SmackDown and 205 Live and Talking Smack. So we're going to have all of that time. I don't know how we're going to spend an hour and a half discussing those shows, because I didn't think anything happened on these shows. Maybe I've been acclimated to the WCW 2000 way of things, but I don't know. I think you and I are going to spend this entire time talking about rap and Donald Trump Jr.
You must be acclimated. And I first of all, I want to very much thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to not only have to deal with WCW 2000, which you and Nate do an excellent job of every other Friday, but this week I forced you to basically sit down and run the gauntlet on Tuesday, and that includes the show that you mentioned, but also WWE 24, Kurt Angle Homecoming, of which I'm sure I know you watch. So would you like to talk a little bit about that before we start?
That is literally the thing I'm most excited to talk about. If we just want to make this a 24/7 or a 24 review, I'm fine with that as well.
You know what? I don't know about the time, because I think we're both on a bit of a schedule, but let's quickly give me your thoughts on the Homecoming special that aired Monday night on the WWE Network.
I loved it. I thought it was really great. I think that in terms of these WWE documentaries, they have a certain... I think from the past, they have a certain knock on them. You think about things like the Ultimate Warrior slam piece they did, the way the Monday Night War documentary sort of played out. But these 24 documentaries have definitely been a lot more truthful, a lot more honest, they feel like. Vince isn't really involved with them, as you see firsthand in the actual documentary we're going to talk about today. But I loved it. I thought we had kind of a warts and all version. I think that this being a WWE production... and it being only an hour, I think the fact that TNA was touched on at all is pretty miraculous. Dixie Carter's in it for all the hay that was made. She's in it for maybe 45 seconds. But the fact that they did touch on that, some of the things that really were glaring in terms of omissions was the fact that they didn't mention his first marriage at all, and they made it seem like he just had kids 5 years ago for the first time. So the fact that they got so personal and were so up close and talking about his demons and his addictions, and the way that being a father has helped him overcome that, and the way that his current wife has been very instrumental in that process and in that recovery, was really heartwarming to watch, but also was a bit of a head scratcher when they then show him with all of his kids. You're like, hey, there's two people here that we didn't hear anything about until this point.
My assumption would be that, I don't know if that was maybe under Angle's perhaps direction, or maybe it was just the simple fact that they didn't have access to Karen to interview, not to mention that she's married to Jeff, who is in charge of GFW right now. But I definitely did think Dixie's inclusion, I think, was probably the most interesting, or most hyped about a fact about this production. And I found her appearance interesting because she is still very much a minority shareholder in GFW and Impact, as far as I know. So her role in this really was to more speak about to fill in the blank in the 10 years that Kurt was outside of the WWE. But the way she came across, and I don't know if this was through editing or whatever, but it kind of her big kind of line in this, she revealed a couple things. like they did a great job. I'm with you. I like the documentary a lot. They really kind of set up, Angle's departure from the WWE because of all the growing problems that he was having. And so, the way it was kind of framed, it kind of made TNA look like a place that would take somebody that the WWE thought was a health risk. And Dixie qualified that by saying that she was concerned about Kurt's health, but trusted him, and she thought that their lighter schedule would make it easier. Ultimately, of course, we know that, didn't really help things. But, I thought the other notable piece from Dixie was that she mentions how Kurt has unfinished business in the WWE. He's always wanted to go back to the WWE, and was almost like coming across like she was cheering him on as this man, Kurt Angle, goes back from the minor leagues to the major leagues. And I think if anything, it shows you how far removed Dixie probably actually is from the current incarnation of TNA or GFW and Impact.
Well, this is also the same person who let Booker T and Kevin Nash go work the Royal Rumble when they were about to debut in a main event angle. So, she is someone who I think does sometimes have, best case scenario, kind heart. Worst case scenario is very naive on how this business actually works. But I think that TNA comes across as well as it can when you're going to condense almost a decade of this man's career into 2 minutes. There was a lot of stuff they could have gotten into, the multiple relapses and issues, the arrests that he had while he was there. And yeah, the fact that this, her way of telling this story of, I thought the lighter schedule could help him, that's very different than the way the TNA story had been told while he was with the company, which was like Jeff Jarrett saying, man, Kevin, Kurt Angle became available and I called him right away and we had him signed like that weekend and we're in this abandoned warehouse shooting these vignettes and no one saw it coming. They obviously didn't tell that version of the story. I think we saw like a screen grab of some wrestling magazine saying he signed with TNA and then her saying, I thought the lighter schedule would be good, and Samoa Joe saying, he pushed himself really hard there. Unless you're going to get into those years, which I think that if this were to be a full, and it comes very close to being a full solid documentary piece and documentary feature film, if it had maybe been 30 more minutes, you could have delved into those years and I think would make the ultimate redemption that he undergoes mean a lot more. Because as bad as he was at WWE, it wasn't like he left WWE and flatlined. He continued to go down. And I'll say it right now, Kurt Angle is my favorite wrestler of all time. So the fact that he is where he is now, I'm so happy and thankful. And honestly, for me on a personal level, it's inspiring to see someone come back to the degree that he has.
Tell me what you thought, Brian, about the interaction between himself and those of Stephanie McMahon, Triple H, and, of course, Vince McMahon as the cameras followed him as far as they could into Titan Towers.
I thought it was interesting because I could almost guarantee that all these people were told that a camera would be following Kurt. They might have just forgotten it. We see Stephanie without makeup on, and she's very keen to mention that she's not wearing makeup when they run into her. And then when the camera's there and Hunter, meets, they hug and it's great. And then they follow Kurt into Vince's office to meet him there. And it's not actually Vince's office. It's like a conference room that they're meeting in. And so they go into the office and they hug, and Vince sees the camera and just like shoots this like death stare and says, just get out now. And it's like, whoa, that's a great way to talk to your employees that are making content for your network. And then Kurt tells a story about how he was mic'd and Vince told him to take that mic off right away, and that's the last that we see of it. And then Vince never comments on the meeting after that fact. There was some bad blood there that I'm sure they had to speak through, but that was interesting. It definitely is different than the Warrior documentary, how when you first see Vince and Warrior interact and they hug, that was the first time they had seen each other, and it was backstage at the Hall of Fame. And that was a very real moment they were able to see. And I guess maybe it was that Vince didn't anticipate the camera being there. Maybe it's that Vince felt more vulnerable. I think it's fair to say that Kurt and Vince were probably closer than Warrior and Vince were. And when you hear Kurt later in the story, later in the documentary, say how Vince was a father to him, and then have Vince echo those same sentiments, it honestly is very like kind of heartwarming in a way that none of the other ones have been, to see him finally be back home and to be embraced back in the fold. So overall, I think that they came across pretty well, aside from that one moment of Vince, shooting daggers at his employees.
I actually love that. And, as somebody like who has been in situations like that, where I've been kicked out of locker rooms for holding a camera in front of people's face, or kicked out of conventions, whatever, those are often like the best little moments. And to me, I kind of took it to mean that Vince... I took it to mean Vince wanted to, as a gesture to Kurt, wanted the cameras out of there, obviously, have him on mic so that the two of them could have a private conversation. I'm sure maybe the conveying of that message was probably not lost on Vince as he did that, and probably gave the okay for that footage to be used. I'm not exactly sure how involved he is in the production of all these things, but it probably made for the most interesting portion of the documentary, and I love that. Overall, I felt like the documentary kind of tells the story of this guy who's essentially cast out of heaven and is now, I guess that makes TNA... I don't know what it makes TNA, but he's been cast out of heaven for the past 10 years. Now he's regained his wings and gets to reunite with God himself, Vince McMahon.
Yeah, I think that's probably the way they would like it to be seen. I thought it was a great story, though. I thought it was a really great documentary, and Kurt's willingness to be so open and honest, I thought was really great. Those Warrior documentaries, when he came back, obviously because he passed away right after the interaction, and the fact that was obviously in the mind of the crew as they were editing it, didn't go to that length. And for a lot of years there, as a Kurt Angle fan, I mean, it was kind of heartbreaking watching this guy and seeing where he was. And I never thought he would be back in the WWE. I had, quite frankly, lost faith that this sort of recovery would be possible. And to see him where he is now makes me really happy. And to see that he is keeping it up for the sake of his family and his kids, and that he's a weekly television character, is really inspiring to watch. I mean, yeah, we've seen Scott Hall come back for a speech, and we've seen Jake Roberts come back for spots here and there. But it's been really incredible to see Kurt recover to the level that he has, and that he's able to be a weekly character. It's great. It's great. And so, yeah, I really love the story.
And if you look at how he says it in the documentary, which I assume would have been filmed right about the time that he came back to now, I think he's really improved on his ability to pronounce WWE.
I would agree. He was out of practice for a while. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think that one of the other things that's definitely has helped, and they obviously don't go into it and say it outright in the special, but I think the fact that he has not wrestled in many months is also probably helpful as well. I mean, his body's not in the pain that it's been, and when you see a special like this, there is no hint that he's ever going to wrestle again. Everything that I've been told and that's been indicated to me is that the company has no interest in him ever wrestling again. So, I mean, the fact they don't even tease it, the fact that he doesn't even say, oh, I think I've got some unfinished business or something like that. They don't, not even one bit. He is done. He is not a wrestler. He is in this place now. And I think it kind of puts that to rest. And honestly, this is a much more happy ending to me than him getting, one final match. Well,
the fact that they made such a big deal about how this man's painkiller addiction strictly came because of his wrestling career, I think I would assume is enough to really kind of, I don't know, deter audiences from wanting to see him wrestle again. So, what do you think there's anything to the rumor that he and Triple H are paired off at some point in the future?
I think there's zero things to that rumor. To be quite honest, no, I don't think there's anything there. I don't think this this texting storyline, which they should have touched on that in this documentary at some point. I don't think that's leading to Triple H. I honestly don't think they have any interest in him wrestling again. I personally have no interest in seeing him wrestle again. But I know wrestling fans can be a selfish bunch sometimes. I mean, I love Daniel Bryan. He's one of my top guys ever. I mean, when I was there, I was pushing so hard for him. But knowing that where he's at now and the risk that getting the ring could be, I don't want to see that. If he wrestled, I would have no interest. And Kurt's the same thing to me. I have no interest in seeing either of those guys wrestle again in or out of the WWE.
New Japan. Kurt Angle, Daniel Bryan. Book it, please.
I would definitely watch the two of them have like a 2K18 like head-to-head if they want to shoot that for up, up, down, down. I would definitely watch that.
We have a lot to talk about, so let's get right
we do.
into SmackDown. And SmackDown comes to us from San Antonio, Texas this week. First, we get a recap of the Madison Square Garden show, and of course, the title switch that took place over the weekend with Kevin Owens losing the U.S. Championship to AJ Styles. This was a highlight package cut between their own ringside camera footage and a bunch of fans' cell phone videos. It looked quite cool and different, and I thought a hell of a promo for their house shows, even though something like this would probably never happen in a much smaller town.
Yeah, I thought it did a good job. I would have preferred if they actually credited people whose footage they took. That would have been good to do. But besides that, no, I thought it was great. I was actually did not go to this house show. I didn't even know it was happening till about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I texted some people on the show who were having their MSG debuts, and I was like, hey, congratulations. They're like, cool, you're going to be there? And I was like, no, I'm not. I have tickets to see Baby Driver again. I'm sorry. I had no idea that this show was happening. So then when I got out of the movie and I saw that the title change had happened, I was like, oh, wow, that's great. Kind of wish I had been there. And then and then a friend of mine who was debating whether or not they should go, they got pissed that they weren't there. So I thought, it was a great promotion for the house shows, because quite frankly, I used to go to every single house show in the New York area, and then they just, over time, they just didn't feel that eventful anymore, and they weren't that fun. And this certainly, next time they come to town, I'm gonna be there. I mean, I'm gonna be at Takeover, but next time they have a MSG house show, I'm gonna make sure I'm there.
You're gonna be there. I'm sure you'll have your cell phone out so that you can record footage.
I'm going to watermark my footage, though, so if they use it, you're going to know where it came from.
But this was almost like an encouragement for audiences to take their cell phones out and record matches, because, I mean, this is... they tell you not to, but, they'll certainly use it when it's appropriate.
It should be noted, and I'm going to say this from firsthand, some of those are planted fan videos. When I was there at SummerSlam, I actually was sent into the crowd to film Kevin Nash on my cell phone so that we would have, and then we planted it on some fake YouTube account, but it was from the company. We planted fan footage. Yeah, so who knows? They could have done that because clearly they knew a title change was going to happen, and I don't know if necessarily every fan at ringside was just shooting at exactly the time when the finish was coming. So maybe one or two of those, not to be unfair to the company, one or two of those might not have been on the up.
I love it. Some inside information here. We go to the start of the show, and AJ comes out. He already has a new U.S. flag shirt, and he says it wasn't too long ago that the U.S. champ wanted to prove that he was the best, and of course he is referring to the John Cena Open Challenge, and then says that the U.S. title has been overlooked too many times, and he introduces the AJ Styles U.S. Open Challenge. He awaits for his first challenger, and who could it be but John Cena? Cena comes out, asks AJ if it means it's open to anybody but him, and then AJ responds, says it especially means it is open for Cena. Cena accepts, down comes Charles Robinson, and we have our first match for the U.S. title, AJ Styles versus John Cena.
Do we?
We get the announcements, we get the fanfare, but before the bell rings, Kevin Owens interrupts, says no one wants to see this match. He talks trash to Cena. Cena responds, says he'll run through Owens, and then he'll run through AJ, but in comes Rusev to attack Cena from behind. Owens and Rusev team up to lay out the baby faces, and the foreign heels stand tall as the crowd chants USA. What do you think of this, Brian?
I liked it. I mean, you knew they weren't going to do the match by the fact that the announcers were saying, get ready, this is going to be a match of the year contender. I'm so glad we get to... They're so overhyping the match that was about to happen that you knew it wasn't going to happen. You knew that they were promising you something that they were going to take right away, because you would never have someone say that in the opening segment of SmackDown if you were actually going to deliver the match. I liked it. One issue that I did have, and I'm kind of coming into this cold, I haven't been watching the shows week to week. One issue that I have is that you have 3 different heels doing the anti-American thing, and it just feels like overload on the show, and especially when there are 3 people that don't necessarily have a connection. You have Kevin Owens doing I'm the face of America. You have Rusev, who just came back last week and suddenly decides that he's going to have this flag match. And then you obviously have what, Jinder's doing. And it just feels weird that the 3 main heels are all playing the same exact card. It just feels really muddy, and it makes all of these feuds feel... There's nothing unique about each feud, and it really helps them feel like they're rooted in any sort of personal issue.
Right. You know, with Rusev and Jinder, I guess kind of their anti-American stances are kind of built into their characters. With Owens, it's really something that's unique to this U.S. title thing, and you're absolutely right. I think the three of them all having a gimmick like this at the same time maybe makes you wonder if Jinder's push would have been better served if it was for this title. Maybe that would clean things up. But I mean, honestly, personally, that's not even something I realized until you brought it up right now. So I have to wonder if it's something that they consider to be a problem or if it's something that the audience really considers to be that big of an issue.
Oh, I think it was an accident. I don't think they planned this. I think it was just purely something they stumbled into by mistake, which is, from what I hear from people, that this is just a byproduct of how overworked they are, and that Vince's current booking mentality is not so much worrying about long-term storylines, but more so worrying about moments. And we're going to make this big moment that pops. And we're going to, later we'll sort of like wrap up the loose ends in terms of like, well, does it make sense overall? Are these consistent characters? And I think this is kind of the byproduct of that. We're not really looking at, okay, how do these moments all come together as one overall show? Individually, each one of these storylines makes sense. John Cena came back on 4th of July. He was talking about the flag. We got Rusev comes in. It's kind of weird to go to a flag match right away for their very first match in this program. And what Jinder's doing makes total sense. And what Kevin Owens doing makes total sense. But it does sort of smack of a creative team that feels like they're running low on ideas, or at least running low on ideas that Vince is sort of catching to. I think there's a lot more to all of these dynamics. I mean, with Jinder, maybe that is the best way to go, but I think Owens and AJ have a lot more to work with than just going to the nationality well.
So we get the announcement that the heels and Owens and Rusev will team up against Cena and AJ for a match later tonight. And then our first match for real this time is Jinder Mahal, the WWE champion, coming out to face Ty Dillinger. The announcers are really putting over Ty's performance in last week's Battle Royal for the U.S. title #1 contendership. And almost immediately, Jinder just dominates. Big short arm clothesline, then some very boring offense. Some punches, some knee drops, a rear chin lock, commercial break, back from break, a brief comeback from Ty, but then almost effortlessly, Jinder applies the Cobra Clutch and then the Colossus for the easy win. So, despite how much they kind of put over Ty's, standing in last week's Battle Royal, this was practically a squash, and we'll see if they follow up on Dillinger in any way. What did you think of the match?
Well, first off, I think the way they might be following up on Dillinger is firing him based on the tweets he had yesterday. but no, I mean, I thought he got more offense than I would have expected based on what he did yesterday online. But I thought the match was, it was very much the Jinder Mahal match that we're used to. And I kind of wonder why. Maybe it's because he's more seasoned, but Bobby Roode is another guy who doesn't necessarily have the most exciting in-ring style, but it's maybe just because he knows how to connect his character to what he's doing in the ring so much better, whereas I think Jinder's still kind of working that out, where, his matches do just sort of feel very punchy-kicky, very, very boring, very generic, almost to the extent that he doesn't know that everyone in the audience has a phone in their pocket that they can take out and look at when they get bored. I think this would have been maybe a great heel work style 15, 20 years ago. But I think he has come along, though, and I think his promo after the match was one of the better ones I've heard him cut.
I'm in the process of going through Flair versus Steamboat from 1989, and I can certainly tell you that even in 1989, I don't think Jinder style would have done anything. Yeah, it's just boring, and you see, I mean, I'm not comparing him to Ric Flair, okay, but even as a heel, even if your goal is to slow down matches as they seem to want to do so much in the WWE, you could just do so many more interesting things and keep an audience's attention that I think a lot better than somebody in Jinder's position. And, I think the man certainly looks the part. That's probably why he's getting pushed as hard as he is. But in ring and on the mic, I think he's not progressing at the rate that I am personally expecting him to for the role that he's been given. But I guess it, brings the question, does the success of this project and their kind of desire to break into India, does it depend really on him being great in ring or in the mic or on the mic? Or can you argue that despite these shortcomings, he's still good enough to achieve their goals for that market?
Possibly. We'll see where things land after Battleground. I think some things might happen at that show that might help a little bit. That's all I'll say. But I think that I personally would have gone the U.S. title route with him, partially because it does work better for the character, I think. Also, I mean, you went from this guy being an absolute joke jobber. I mean, when he was even put in a number one contenders match, it was a joke. And then when he won, it was a joke. And I think it does a discredit both to himself and the title and the show overall, because, I mean, you had, at the end of the show, you have John Cena and AJ Styles warring over this mid-card title, which is easily at a higher level than where the world title is right now because of this. And it's nothing against Jinder, and it's nothing against where I think he could go. And even if you use the comparison of JBL, which is someone you can bring up of a guy who wasn't that high up before they put the title on him, JBL was at least winning matches beforehand. There was some sort of push behind him, and they reinvented his character. Jinder, it was just, hey, you were a jobber 2 weeks ago, and now we've decided we're going to put the world title on you. So I think that that's a large thing to sort of overcome, and absent a complete and total character transformation and a new maybe a new move, maybe a new in-ring style, and nothing else has changed. It's just that his booking has changed, and it's sort of, we hate to use the F word, but it does make everything feel very fake on the show when that can sort of happen to a character overnight.
Xavier Woods versus Jey Uso is our next match. And quickly, do you have any thoughts from the rap battle last week? Did you watch it?
I did watch it. I thought it was pretty good. I wouldn't necessarily call it a rap battle as much as I would probably say it was some slam poetry, but I thought it was still really good. Shout out to Wale for wearing an NWO shirt, an NWO Wolfpack shirt for the segment. But I thought it was good. I thought it was a fresh, different way of doing a face-to-face confrontation. When I was there, so many times you'd struggle with, we've got to have an in-ring segment with these two. What do we do? Is it just like this person calls this person out? Is it just a promo segment? Do you call it a contract signing? I thought this was a fresh way to do a face-to-face interaction, and I'm surprised it took them this. I mean, rap battles have been in popular mainstream culture since 8 Mile, and that was 2002. So I'm surprised it took them this long to do it, but I would love for this to come along more often. You can't do it with everybody, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was good.
I loved it. I thought it was almost a coming out party of sorts for the Usos, who I think for the past several months have been kind of obviously developing this new persona that they have, and I thought this was probably the biggest thing that they've done thus far in their WWE careers, and I was looking for them to really follow up on that, particularly with the Usos, who I think the world agrees were the only rappers in that little battle. So off the top here, it's just a match. Xavier Woods versus Jey Uso. And from the beginning, Jimmy trips Woods from the outside. Kofi and Big E come in to complain. Robinson ends up ejecting everybody standing ringside, so it's just a singles match between Woods and Jey. Super kick from Jey for a near fall. Top rope splash from Jey is blocked by Xavier's knees. Xavier hits a diving elbow to Jey, who's caught up in the middle rope, and he just gets the win. So it was a match to build up the challengers, but I think this week, myself included, everybody was looking to hear a bit more personality from the participants involved, particularly the Usos. But we do get an appearance from them on Talking Smack, which we'll cover later.
Yes. I thought, it was a fine little match that did what it needed to do. I was surprised to see Xavier win. He's usually the sacrificial lamb for the New Day. But yeah, I mean, it did what it needed to do. Can't really say anything positive or negative for it. Xavier went with that sort of middle rope elbow drop that's very reminiscent of the Del Rio corner stomp, where you have to suspend a lot of disbelief that the guy will stay in position that long for the move. But overall, I thought it was fine.
We go to Shane backstage, who's on the phone with Brian because he's not here tonight, and just says, give my best to your little baby. Naomi walks in, wants to know who she'll be defending her title against, and then all the women from the locker room come in, minus, Carmella, of course. Charlotte, Becky, Natalya, Lana, Tamina, all walk in, all demand title shots. Shane reveals that at Battleground, there will be a 5-way elimination match for the #1 contendership at SummerSlam. So Charlotte says it's bullshit that Lana keeps getting these chances, and Tamina is quick to step in to Lana's defense. and threatening Charlotte for talking bad about Lana, continuing to tease whatever storyline that they are teasing between Tamina and Lana, and this supposed big secret that Tamina is keeping for the reason why she is defending Lana. Do you have any guesses what that could be, Brian?
One guess is that this creative team needs some new ideas when it comes to long-term storylines other than just secrets. Someone has a secret about somebody else. I have no idea. I mean, is it just going to be that there's that there's some sort of union between these two, and that that they help each other win? I can't really think of what could possibly be there. I mean, I guess the best thing would be that you get to the, and actually this would probably be the way I would do the finish, is that you get to a point where it looks like Tamina is helping Lana win, where she's just taking everybody out, Lana's sort of standing by applauding or whatever, and then when it seems that maybe Charlotte has been taking care of and just lying there and Lana's going to steal the pin, maybe then Tamina then lays out Lana, and then Tamina is now your number one contender. That could maybe be an interesting way to go, that Tamina's been playing Lana this entire time. But I don't really see any long-term in Lana. It feels like they've sort of grafted the Eva Marie storyline onto her, but I don't think she necessarily has the charisma or the innate hateability that Eva Marie did.
Well, I think the pairing of the two of them certainly helps both. I mean, I think Lana, all her strengths are essentially the other's weaknesses, and I don't know what reason they can conceivably come up with that would be satisfying, nor do I know if they need that big of a reason that they're making such a big deal of. Heels just get together all the time, but here, I guess this is supposed to be some big revelation that we're supposed to find out in the coming weeks. So we'll see what they deliver. Carmella then walks in. Oh, by the way, Shane makes Becky and Charlotte versus Natalya and Tamina for tonight. And then Carmella walks in, hands Shane a letter from his attorney wanting to reinstate James Ellsworth. Shane reads it and rips it, says the decision stands. So the announcement for the match at Battleground, we are getting essentially another multi-women number one contenders match. Is this the right thing to do, or do you think they should be giving Naomi a proper feud heading into Battleground?
I mean, I guess the feud can develop out of this match, but I don't know. I guess it feels very odd. It feels like very similar to what happens over on Raw a lot of the time, is that they have a hard time writing more than one female storyline on the show at once, which was not an issue a year ago on SmackDown. They were actually being championed online because you'd have Becky and Mickie James at the same time as you had Alexa Bliss having a storyline, and you would have multiple balls being juggled. And that's not necessarily happening right now. You have Charlotte, who more or less, I mean, it was established on Raw, she is the best competitor in this company. Wasn't she she was drafted first, wasn't she, by Raw, if I'm not mistaken? She was
Yes.
the first woman yeah. And so they said that she was the best athlete in this company. They put her on such a high pedestal, and now it just feels like, oh, you could almost physically see them putting her on the back burner. And they don't have anything for her back there other than just, oh, you're going to come up short in these matches. It's just so odd when you have someone who is so clearly the top performer in the division being pushed to the side. Not to say that she always has to be in the title program. The Rock wasn't always in the title program, but there's always something for The Rock to do. And it just feels like with Charlotte having nothing to do, and we don't know, are we calling her a heel? Are we calling her a babyface? It just feels like they're misusing one of their biggest assets, and that's also an issue on Raw right now as well, with the way they've been handling Bayley and Sasha lately.
She's definitely a babyface now, especially with the association with Becky. But the transition to that perhaps could have been treated with a bit more focus. But I just feel like it's almost too many multi-women's number one contender matches in a row. And I understand the need to do it because the Money in the Bank isn't technically a number one contendership match, but it's just too much of the same type of match with the same type of people too soon, in my opinion. Who do you think takes it for the SummerSlam? I
don't know. I mean, but you just mentioned it right there. I think what could have been a much better use of their time is, like, what if a friendly rivalry had developed between Becky and Charlotte, and they had a best 3 out of 5 series over the last couple of weeks? They've never done that with two women. It would be a historic thing, and then that could have ended at this pay-per-view. I agree with the multi-women. It's been an issue the last couple years at WrestleMania. We've gotten multi-women title matches. It's something that happens because they don't give them dedicated individual feuds. They feel like they've got to lump them all into the same segment. Now, in terms of who wins it, who takes it, I don't know. I mean, the fact that they keep bringing up something between Tamina and Lana would make you think that it's one of those two, unless smart money, I would say go with Charlotte because she is so great and you're going to be in Brooklyn, you're going to be at SummerSlam. You don't want this to just be a filler match on the card, but since it is going to be a stacked 4-hour show, that's how they might view it, and that's what they might treat it as. So who knows? I mean, this could also somehow become like a Tamina, Lana, Naomi three-way somehow. That's what I would put my own on. Somehow a three-way coming out of this.
Renee is with Baron Corbin backstage, and they replay a clip of Baron attacking Shinsuke last week. And then Baron says he's going to teach another lesson to Shinsuke tonight. Says it'll be sayonara. I messed it up. Sayonara Nakamura.
So, I think you delivered it as well as Baron did.
So clever. This was a match they announced prior to the show. Shinsuke Nakamura versus Baron Corbin. Nakamura comes out first. And then Corbin, as he's making his entrance, is attacked by Nakamura, who just runs after him into the crowd. They keep brawling, and this brawl, I guess, ended up being so crazy. They got hit.
Could not have this match. Oh, they couldn't do it.
They Irish whipped each other into the boards. They touched concrete with their feet. It was so wild that the agents, Adam Pearce and Jamie Noble, ran in to try to break them up, and they called the match. You know, it was not like either man was even injured, you know. This was hardly the type of brawl that I think justified a match being thrown out.
It was a real OMG moment that they had themselves here.
It just felt like a typical brawl into the crowd that often leads into actually the start of the match in the ring. So I felt like they were just missing this big stunt, you know. Like, I would buy it if Nakamura laid out Corbin with, like, I don't know, a ring bell or a cinder block or something like that. But I thought it was a bit of a unfair bait and switch, considering that you already took away the AJ Styles John Cena match earlier in the night.
It also didn't seem like it didn't feel like Nakamura should have been the guy starting it. It felt like it would have been much better. And this is obviously similar to what they did at Money in the Bank, but if you had Nakamura, who's known for his big entrance, and then he gets attacked from behind by Baron, it just felt weird that the babyface was the one doing the attacking. And yeah, the attack didn't feel up to the level to warrant the match not starting, especially the week that, we saw Roman Reigns attempt to murder somebody on the other show. So I agree. It felt a little off, and I mean, well, I guess we can get into it when they announce that this match is actually happening at Battleground. I feel so bad for Nakamura. Like, this is not the best use of this guy. You have one of the absolute top 5 talents in the entire world, and you're using him to get over Baron Corbin, who I'm not saying is bad, but Baron Corbin to me is like Kane level. He can be a big guy who's in that hovering around that main event scene, but he shouldn't be a guy with the Money in the Bank. He shouldn't be a guy teasing up for title contention. I just feel so, because, yeah, Nakamura is probably not going to be around in 5 years. He might not be around in 3 years, but I think you can get so much out of this guy. You can make so much money on him between now and then. To have him being in mid-card feuds, heating up your Money in the Bank winner is just such a misuse of this guy.
Well, my assumption is that Nakamura ends up winning this, and that's because Corbin, because he does have the briefcase, can't afford the loss, is my thinking. This also being a B show, perhaps they want to save some of those more marquee Nakamura matchups for a bigger show. But then again, I mean, you can argue that he is somebody who is actually in need of a big match right now, because he has he's done okay, but I would say his run thus far, excuse me, on SmackDown, it has been a little underwhelming. So I think taking the chance to have this great match, and man, let's keep an open mind. Maybe they'll have an amazing match between Nakamura and Baron Corbin. But as for like him coming out first, I think this week they wanted to have Nakamura with the advantage, since Corbin was the one who attacked him from behind last week.
No, I guess I was aware of that because they played it there. But again, this is the first episode. I'm just looking at it strictly from a heel babyface. So yes, I could see that you don't want Nakamura being taken advantage of every week. But then in that case, maybe the beatdown should have been more vicious than just a or maybe something that felt a little bit more like maybe that Nakamura had a plan ahead of time. Like, it would have been great if maybe he actually allows Baron to come to the ring and then he like pulls a pipe out from his like pant leg or something like that. Something that just showed what actually could have been great was, you know, maybe Baron comes in when Baron's back is turned, Nakamura runs up with a Kinshasa and then reveals that he had like a metal plate in his boot or something like that. So something that showed that like he had a premeditated plan, not just, well, I'm going to go to the ring, I'm going to do my entrance, but I'm going to attack you in the entranceway and make sure this match doesn't happen. It just didn't seem like the right look for the babyface.
AJ is with Cena in the back. Cena tells AJ that he should think twice about this US Open challenge. AJ says he knew Cena would be the first to accept and says he hasn't forgotten about the last time Cena beat him. So he's going to, and he also says he's going to hold the title for a long time. Cena says he respects AJ. He has AJ's back tonight, but afterwards, he's going for that US title. Cedric Alexander, we see, and he says... He says he's tried to break away from Alicia Fox and Noam Dar for months, and tonight he's finally going to make him say, I quit. I assume, Brian, this was probably the first time you've seen one of these 205 Live insert kind of promo videos of a man just standing next to a screen talking to the camera, begging you to stay tuned to 205 Live.
And it was done so well, it's what convinced me to watch 205 Live.
Oh.
I have no idea why they put these in the show. It's probably notable. These are the only thing that happened on the show that they don't put on YouTube after the fact. Just pointless. It's worthless. A video package, I think, would have done a much better job. He looked like he was, it almost looked like a TRL type setup, or even like a local weatherman. Just like this one guy standing by this little box next to him with a logo on it. I get that they want a presence on the show, but this almost would have been better to just go to the announcers, have Todd Phillips look at the camera and be like, hey, this rivalry is going to get blown off tonight. I just thought this did such a disservice to the characters, having him have to play fucking pitchman for this show.
Becky Lynch and Charlotte versus Tamina and Natalya. Becky and Charlotte, they appear to be the best of friends right now, and the two of them even have a new hand gesture that the announcers referred to, at least this week, as tea time. It's basically a too sweet, but with their pinkies extended instead, I guess. So we could try that, Brian, if I ever see you again, and we could do a bit of tea time.
Come on, you better make it for Wale Mania next year. You showed up late this year.
I'll try my best.
Okay.
Tamina has Becky in a rear chinlock, and out comes Lana to watch. She smiles as Tamina gains momentum in the match. Lana gets up onto the apron to distract Charlotte. Charlotte doesn't see the blind tag from Natalya to Tamina, and with a distraction from Lana, Tamina super kicks and pins Charlotte. And the announcers continue to ask, what's the deal with Tamina and Lana? What is the deal?
I don't know, guest commentator Jerry Seinfeld. I think that I'm going to put my money down on Tamina is playing Lana. At least that's what I hope is going on.
Interesting. All right, Maria Kanellis is backstage. She knocks on the male locker room's door, and Chad Gable answers. Maria just towers over Chad Gable, and it looked like a little kid opening the door for, like,
yeah, I mean, she had heels, and I don't think the forced perspective of the shot certainly didn't help. But yeah, if you've been wondering why Chad Gable has not been on TV lately, I think that this image summed it up.
Unfortunately, did Gable no favors here. Maria says she's looking for Sami Zayn, and he owes her something. We come back from commercial break, and Sami finds Maria and Mike Kanellis, and Maria says Sami owes her an apology. Sami says, I've already apologized to you 2 times. I don't think I need to. And Sami continues to ask, what is it that Mike Kanellis is actually doing here? Is he even a competitor? Maria slaps Zayn. Mike Kanellis then smashes a glass vase full of flowers onto Zayn. So, beginning that feud with... We'll talk a bit more about this on Talking Smack, but this is essentially a feud that has been built up by a man interrupting another man.
By accident, even. Like, he doesn't even stand by it. It's just purely a coincidence that this feud is starting. That was a good point that Sami Zayn brought up. what is Mike Kanellis doing here? Has he been invited? Does he have a contract? Does he work here? Is he just visiting people? How's he getting access to the backstage? I don't think he asked Shane any of these questions later on. Or did Shane like defend why Kanellis is even here? It does seem odd that he's here week after week without there really being a motivation. Maybe if he was like lobbying for a contract, that would mean something, but we haven't explained why this dude's even here.
The fact that I guess they haven't announced officially the match yet, but perhaps we'll talk about it next week. We got our latest Fashion Files, and this time it's a take on Walker, Texas Ranger. This is Runway Walker, Texas Ranger, and definitely I'll say the most work that went into this whole thing was the intro video, which featured plenty of green screening and a lot of clips of Fandango and Breeze and Chuck Norris from Survivor Series 94, the only footage, I guess, of Chuck Norris they actually have the rights to, edited together in a Walker, Texas Ranger parody. Well, let's talk about the segment first. Fandango comes in, rides a wooden horse, and that he calls Tully, and goes up to interrogate Zack Ryder. Tyler Breeze comes in with a lasso that he calls the lasso of truth, but he gets caught up in it himself, and we learn, because he is telling the truth, that Tyler Breeze wears bras when he goes undercover. Mojo Rawley walks in. Breezango asks them where they were the night that Breezango were attacked. Mojo says that he wouldn't do anything that shady, but then Zack says, "Oh yeah, what about last week when you eliminated me from the Battle Royal?" And Breezango decides that Mojo and Zack Ryder are not suspects, and instead they both come up with the thought that ghosts or aliens or ghost aliens could be the ones that attacked him. And we get a teaser for next week's Fashion X-Files, which are coming up. What do you think of these, and I guess the new Breezango characters overall?
I like them. I like that two guys are getting some time to experiment backstage. I don't think that's something that gets done enough. It's not always going to be a home run, but when you would hear about Edge and Christian back in the day, a lot of that was just them and Brian Gewirtz going off of the camera and fucking around backstage. So I'm glad that they're allowing some people the ability to do that. I thought Breeze had a really good line in here where Zack Ryder asked him if he wore a bra when he did his sketch, and he said, "Of course, I'm not a hippie." I thought that was a really good line. But I thought where this kind of went off the rails was the fact that they were trying to incorporate a storyline advancement for another character into it. So these guys felt like they were playing second fiddle in their own character vignette, which I didn't think helped. And also, I didn't think that the kind of grounded animosity that we're seeing between Mojo and Ryder was necessarily... I thought it just sort of threw this whole segment off, the inclusion of those two. I thought the opening video package was really funny. It showed they put some time and effort into it. I would be curious to see who actually edited that thing together. And but overall, I like Breeze, and I like Fandango. And when I first heard they're going to do this, I sort of groaned. But they're good. I think they're good comedy characters, and I think these are a welcome breakup on these shows. And they're unlike anyone else on the show, which I really appreciate. I just thought that the inclusion of Mojo and Ryder here was not necessarily the best call, I would say, for advancing and just delivering a pleasing segment. I thought it did a disservice to both teams.
Yeah, I think the gag at this point for Breezango is all in those parody intros. And, the type of humor isn't necessarily for me. I think I can only handle so many Chuck Norris jokes in my lifetime. Yeah, I didn't find this week's all that clever, as clever as many of their other ones in the past. But I think for many people, these segments continue to be highlights of SmackDown. And, I'm really happy for them. I think they're actually a tag team that does stand out, which is a lot more than I can say for a lot of the teams on Raw. So we also get a bit more in the Mojo-Zack feud in building on that rift for this week. We go to Kevin Owens. Our main event, Kevin Owens and Rusev versus John Cena and AJ Styles. Cena and Rusev's first matches back on SmackDown following their hiatuses. The babyfaces take turns building to hot tags. The heels cut off AJ for a very long time. And then Cena finally tags in, gets a comeback, tries to AA Owens, but Rusev comes in. AJ takes both of them out. This leaves Owen susceptible to the AA from John Cena, and the babyfaces get the win. I thought overall it was a good, well-paced, but very formulaic WWE tag team match, but it definitely got the crowd.
Yeah, I felt like I was at a WWE house show watching this match. It was a fine 2-segment match that filled time. Yeah, I mean, it was very by the numbers. It reminded me when I was at WWE, this would be the easiest way to book a match and to fill time of just, okay, the heels, 2 heels versus 2 babyfaces from 2 feuds, and that's going to be a tag team match. And then they sort of teased the animosity between Cena and AJ at the end. They clearly are teasing they're going to go to that match again. I don't know when or how soon they will, but it's interesting that they're keeping that in the back of your mind. So who knows? Maybe they think they might actually go to that at SummerSlam. I think that if AJ retains the U.S. title on Sunday and then John wins on Sunday, they could have a feud of, who is the most patriotic. We just both got rid of these nefarious foreign heels. Let's, you and I. So who knows? Maybe that might be the long-term feud they're going to, because they certainly teased it at the end here.
AJ and Cena certainly seems like a SummerSlam-worthy matchup. Otherwise, I don't see them building all the way even to Survivor Series for a match like that. So that would be my assumption, is what they're leading to. But the match itself, I'm completely with you. And Brian, you finished SmackDown before I actually started, and you texted me that not much happens on the show. But despite all that, I was going into the show with an open mind. But I'll say that I don't think you were wrong at all, Brian. This SmackDown really didn't feature anything that awful or that embarrassing, but it certainly didn't feature anything that good either. And I'll say it was almost a totally skippable SmackDown.
Right. It was one of those things where it almost felt like maybe last week they got their calendar confused and they thought that it was their go-home show for Great Balls of Fire, and they realized, oh, wait, actually our show's in 2 weeks. And, I mean, especially like last week when you did a Money in the Bank ladder match on the show, it's tough to follow that up. And I'm not saying that every single week has to be car crash. It doesn't have to be Nitro every week, as much as I wish it were. But still, there's something to the fact, I don't know if WWE, or they might have, but I don't know if Vince has necessarily gotten to this point. They're not just competing against every show that's on Tuesday at 8 o'clock. They are competing against every show and every every show and every movie ever made. This is a streaming era. And it's summertime. There's a lot of things you could do with your night at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday other than watch SmackDown. And there was many times where if we weren't reviewing the show, I probably would have said, nah, maybe I'll check on YouTube tomorrow and see if anything happened. After the opening segment, I popped it home when John Cena came out. I thought that was interesting. I forgot that he was even going to be around for the show. But after that, there was multiple times where I probably would have turned the channel, picked up a book, maybe texted a friend. There wasn't a lot on the show that compelled me to continue watching it.
I also was not a fan of a lot of the booking on the show. They teased AJ and Cena, and then they took it away. Then they teased Corbin Nakamura, took that away. So I thought overall the show didn't feel like a good investment of my 2 hours. A generic but good main event, but then a lot of very average matches and forgettable backstage vignettes. So I'll say Raw, I definitely think was a better show this week.
Yeah, and I didn't watch Raw. I think that, as crazy as it is, Nate might have gotten the upper hand here. When you sort of came to us and offered us the shows, I was quick to jump on SmackDown. I was like, it's 2 hours. It's usually a better show. I'm going to do that. But instead, I did SmackDown. I did 205 Live. I did Talking Smack. This thing was almost 4 hours of my evening.
Oh my
and
God.
On top of it, it was 4 hours where not a damn thing was achieved. Maybe the best thing was John Cena had an okay moonshine joke with Shane, and that was literally the very last thing that happened at the end of these 4 hours, not to spoil the conclusion of our discussion.
Well, let's get to Talking Smack, and boy, do I feel bad for the week that I picked you to do the show, Brian, because you get to enjoy
John chose a great week to go. He looked at it and he said, when is Brian having a baby? And he said, okay, Shane's going to be there. I'm going to take some time off. Shane was better than I have seen him be in other weeks. I got to say, I loved 205. Not 205. I loved Talking Smack when it first came out. There's many weeks where I would only watch Talking Smack because I would get a full feel of what happened on the show, and I got a much more intimate and interesting view of what happened on the show. This week's episode was nothing that special. Cena was not taking a damn thing seriously. I thought Shane was... Shane was trying to be cool Shane. He spent the first 5 minutes talking about surfing and what hanging tin means. And Renee was in this really weird place where I haven't seen her. I don't know if Shane made her feel uncomfortable, but she seemed really desperate to want to be liked by the guests, if that made sense.
I'm glad I'm not the only one that picked that up.
Yeah.
I thought Renee actually had a week off, had a bad week on Talking Smack on this episode. And I think that what you just said was perfectly highlighted, particularly with the Usos appearance. And they were the first guests, of course. They talk about the rap battle. The Usos tell us that the social media definitely thinks that the Usos won, which Shane agrees. And then the Usos challenge Shane and Renee to do their own rap battle. At this point, Renee looked so scared. She kind of fumbles, brings up like a salt and pepper reference, and then with nothing better to say, she just asks, "So tell me, what's going on in the Uso world? What is going on in the Uso world?" The Usos have no response to that. Shane sees the struggle here and bails them out, decides to ask the Usos a question about their down since day one-ish shirts, and seeing Shane try to figure out what ish means. Renee, I guess for lack of anything more interesting to talk about concerning the Usos, points out Jimmy's giant wedding ring on his finger and asks for their opinion on Naomi's title run. Jimmy says he's jealous of Naomi's glowing title. The Usos overall, as they usually do on Talking Smack, come across very likable in this. But this conversation felt very awkward. They came across like two pairs of people from completely different worlds forced to sit in a long car ride together.
Renee also, I think at one point, was just thrown off of the entire conversation because she also got confused which Uso was married to Naomi, and they called her out on it. I don't know if it was the surfing discussion off the top. I mean, Talking Smack is a weird show in that you never go to commercial break. It's just straight 30 minutes. So if you get knocked off at one point, maybe you're just feeling, well, you need to take a moment to breathe. You don't get that break within Talking Smack. And I don't know if it was her and Shane comparing their tans at the beginning of the show. It felt from the very beginning that she was just a step behind and trying to catch up. And I get it. Everyone has off shows. And it just felt like this was one of those evenings for her.
Our next guest is Sami Zayn, and Zayn is still icing his head from the vase shot from Mike Kanellis. Talk about awkward. Shane starts off the interview by saying, "Hey, I really liked that line when Maria said to you at the end, 'Love hurts.' Yeah. What a great line." And Zayn, who's still ice, who just put down the bag of ice for his head, has to react like, "Yeah, that was great. How about when they hit me in the head with the glass vase?"
Right.
So,
hey, I was just assaulted in your workplace. How about we discuss that?
So then we continue the segment, and we basically see Sami Zayn try to justify his interruptions of Maria and Mike Kanellis over the past 2 weeks, and says the first week his music played and he had to come out, he had no choice, and then says the next week he needed to stretch. And that's about as much material as this man has been given to try to get us to care about his fight with this man. Zayn, makes his best, tries his best and makes the most of it, but this conversation, as predicted, or as you can predict, will also quickly ran out of steam, and then they had to just send Sami on his way. I just think there's, at this point, no meat to this feud. It's a feud of a man interrupting another man a few times on TV.
I thought it was so great. So I love Sami Zayn. I love the Sami Zayn character. He just feels like the most normal guy on this entire show, especially when he talks in this setting. Like he gets worked up. He's clearly passionate, and he has nothing. He has no issue with these people. It's like, well, I don't control the music. I just came out, and okay, maybe the second week I did interrupt their interview by knocking over a pole, but that's it. And then Shane like middle-aged Shane tries to lean in. He's like, yeah, but I mean, come on. He wears like flower shirts and he took his wife's name. And Sammy's like, yeah, no, it's 2017. I'm not going to say the guy's like, I'm not going to emasculate him for that. I respect his choices. And it's like, they're really kind of like feed him. It's like, no, like this guy's a pussy. Like that's the storyline. You got to say that. And he's like, no, I think that's perfectly fine. Like I got nothing. I have no issues with him. It just, we bumped into each other in the hallway a couple times. Yeah. And he broke a flower pot over my head, but you thought the line was cute. It just, nothing is being set up here for Sami Zayn. It's like, I guess because Sami Zayn doesn't know what side he's on in this feud, and the company clearly isn't necessarily on the side that he wants to be on. It would have been really easy, and they clearly want him to jump on, oh man, yeah, this guy, he's taking his wife's name and he's wearing flower shirts. That's what they want the audience to say, but clearly Sami Zayn isn't comfortable doing that as well. And then he goes a step further and saying, like, I'm not going to get into deep political conversations. Renee, you and I do that all the time. We go on for hours. But, I just think the world needs a little more love and tolerance. It's like, great. What a great basis for a pro wrestling feud. I want to tolerate you, but we keep knocking poles over in front of each other.
Shouldn't he be joining Mike and Maria then? I mean, if he's battling for love, it's...
That actually would be a better feud if he was, like, attempted to then, like, double date with them, but he's also, like, nefariously trying to break them up. That would be really interesting, but nothing interesting is happening in the vicinity of these people.
Certainly some issues with this feud. We'll see how they continue to build with it, but you can even tell in this segment that Zayn was struggling with trying to understand his own feud and his own motivations in his part here. Our third and final guest for Talking Smack is John Cena. Cena sounds, his voice in this sounded a little hoarse, and maybe he was shouting a lot after his match earlier, or maybe he just lost his voice, because we learned that the man just flew in from Sydney last night.
Yep.
And he mentions this kind of just very casually, as if it was, not a big deal for him. Renee is stunned. Cena did come back from Australia from doing 3 stage shows, sort of like a Q&A thing, I guess he's doing down there, and just came back, I would assume yesterday, considering the length of the flight. So Cena briefly talks about the match with Rusev at Battleground, says there's more on the line in this than just the match. He's doing this for America. And Cena says that he knows there's a sunset on the horizon, and says that he's here to make the most out of every day he has left in the company. So again, just like last week in his promo, making a real point to reiterate his intention to retire in the near future.
Yeah, and I like this old man Cena storyline. I like that. It's kind of a shame they already went to that well a couple years ago, and they did the Rusev feud the first time. But I like that they actually are setting up the path for the proper Cena retirement storyline. What I fear is that since they're bringing up all this like Americana stuff, I do fear that maybe we're setting up long-term for him to be the ultimate guy to slay Jinder down the line. I think they're going to make a big deal out of his next title win. It's going to be when he actually breaks Ric Flair's record. I think the fact that the last one was such an unmemorable 2-week reign was just to get him to that number. And I think that we are on the twilight of the John Cena character, and I hope they get the most out of him towards the end. And I mean, I've taken a real, kind of 360 on the Cena character the last couple years, and I'm going to miss him. I'm going to miss the guy, and he is such a hard-working dude, and I'm happy to see the success he's having coming out of the company, and I hope they use him to his full potential, because I think that even though it was a great moment, I think the mixed tag of this year at WrestleMania was a real... they really squandered his star power, especially coming off his most mainstream year, to put him in that kind of a position. I thought it was a real misuse of him. I thought that would have been a great SummerSlam match, but at WrestleMania, I thought it was not the best position for him. So hopefully we're setting up something big for him at this year's Mania. I personally would prefer a passing the torch type match between him and Roman to beating the Evil Foreigner program with Jinder, but we'll see where they end up long term.
To end the segment, Cena takes a sip out of Shane's cup, spits it out, jokes that it's 7-Up and not moonshine, and to this the director says, "That's enough. End this show."
As soon as Shane says, it's moonshine, you hear that music come up, and Renee's like, well, we got to go, guys. We are out of time.
It was an interesting show this week, Talking Smack with varied results. I thought Renee was actually having an off night, and none of the conversations seemed all that natural, nor did they seem to achieve the elevation of anybody nor their feud. So it, to me, much like SmackDown, just felt like they were filling time on this particular episode of Talking Smack.
It felt like an episode where Shane was literally in the backseat of his car waiting for his driver to get there. Someone knocked on the window. He rolls it down. They say, no, you got to come back. You got to come do Talking Smack. Brian's not here this week. And he's like, oh, fuck. Because he seemed like he was halfway out the door this entire show.
Our main event, 205 Live, Brian.
Main event, it was very similar to the show Main Event, I would say, in terms of... This was the first episode of 205 Live I've watched in a long time. When it first premiered, I watched the first couple episodes, and I quickly fell off as the quality fell off as well, and very obvious I have not been missing much based on this program.
Well, you kind of have to shift your expectations, I feel, for when you're watching 205 Live, because you are very much just watching preliminary matches, you know, matches that would otherwise be not even take place on a kickoff match at a pay-per-view for the WWE. So I think that's, you know, always been one of the biggest complaints about 205 Live is the fact that it has to follow all this other programming with so much star power. That said, I mean, this was... Yeah, I'll say this right off the bat. I felt more happened in terms of storyline on 205 Live than maybe SmackDown.
Oh, I would absolutely agree. I would agree with that.
So we start off the show. We have Akira Tozawa backstage. He's on the phone with Titus, who is not in attendance tonight. So I could only assume that they didn't have enough time to shoot the pre-tape last night, which they usually do, I suppose. Titus is basically there to speak for Tozawa and says something about his rematch with Neville that he's trying to get. And then Daivari interrupts, hangs up on Titus, and says he's booked a match between him and Tozawa tonight. Daivari says in Iran, wrestling has been a martial art for thousands of years, unlike in Japan, and says great Iranian wrestlers like Hassan Yazdani, the 2016 Olympic gold medalist in wrestling, never had to beg for matches. Tozawa says, don't question my honor, and Daivari says he's going to dedicate tonight's match to Hassan Yazdani. Arya Daivari versus Akira Tozawa is our first match, and Tozawa, Rana, penalty kick, then a senton, then a belly-to-back suplex. Tozawa is on the apron. He's about to springboard, but Neville runs in and attacks him from behind, causing the DQ. Graves says Neville is still obviously upset about losing to Tozawa on Raw last night, and Neville runs Tozawa into the barricade, stalks him, and then applies the Rings of Saturn in the ring to end the segment.
Yeah, I thought one big note, not to take us back too far, but props on the way you summarize that opening segment, because I think you made it come across as like halfway competent and decent. This segment was awful. The way that this show started, I thought both guys were off. It starts with them in one of those awkward WWE backstages where we are in a room composed completely of curtains. It looks like they're in, you know, like the Black Lodge from Twin Peaks. They're just in front of these purple curtains sitting around a coffee table with a perfectly stationed phone on top of it, a very natural setting for these two men to find themselves in. Titus is on speakerphone. Daivari picks up the phone, but speakerphone continues to go like it's totally mistimed, then slams it down, so hangs up on Titus, but Titus's voice is still heard. Just a very awkward interaction. There was no second take here. The Daivari's promo was a little off, and yeah, then the match that followed was okay, and I feel kind of bad for the listeners here. I know that both the shows we talked about weren't that great, and I know a lot of my observations are probably pretty pedestrian because I don't watch this on a week-to-week basis, but it was just so clear that this is a show that needs to be taped beforehand. The fact that it comes after does a real disservice. At one point, they did an establishing shot of the entire arena, and I would say, at least 40% of the people had already left. When they're shooting the matches, they're shooting them very tight because of this. And yeah, the crowd was just totally dead. Even though I thought these guys, and this is every match, came out and they worked really hard, and the chemistry was smooth, and the work rate was fine, but just the overall presentation of the show, something big has got to change. Yeah.
I really appreciate actually having somebody of your perspective doing 205 Live, because I think John and I, we've been doing this show every week since it started, and I think by this point our expectations for the show are so lowered that a lot of these things don't even necessarily stand out as much to us as they may to somebody like you watching it for the first time in a long time. And going back to even the skit backstage, like, you're right, this was like actually quite awful, but it's also just the level of, I guess, acting that I've expected from 205 Live at this point. Like, we're talking about a group of guys who kind of spent a lot of time on the indies, or you know, in the case of Akira Tozawa in Japan, not even cutting promos in English or being involved in backstage segments that have to be carried with somebody speaking English. And now they're all being put into this environment where they essentially have to learn on the job, and not just, you know, the wrestling is obviously their greatest attribute, but it's more so all the character stuff, all the script reading, and acting, pretending to talk to men on speakerphones that we kind of have to see them grow with every single week. And this was, I guess, one of those. And I mean, to me, this was like not even that bad, because I think I've seen worse from Arya Davari. I feel like he is slowly improving, but
yeah.
To get your perspective, I can't disagree. Drew Gulak. They replayed Drew Gulak's attempt from his match to dive 2 weeks ago, and I'm sure, Brian, you can pick up the fact that Drew Gulak has been working this anti-flying, no diving gimmick. He had a match 2 weeks ago with Mustafa Ali, and the best moment of that match was Gulak actually deciding to go up to the top rope and basically selling it like he was afraid of heights, and he was like, you know, flying for the first time, thinking that he could do it finally, but he misses this dive and ends up getting pinned as a result. So here we see Drew Gulak holding a press conference. He's behind a podium, and he says very seriously that 2 weeks ago I caved into peer pressure and I had a momentary lapse of judgment. Regrettably, like a common show-off, I dove, and I allowed Mustafa Ali to even our feud at 2 matches apiece. So then he proposes another match with Ali to finally settle their feud, a 2 out of 3 falls match. What'd you think?
This is where, when I was watching it, it became very clear what this show is. It's a show I worked on. It's NXT Redemption is what this show is. Which, if people forget NXT Redemption was the season of NXT that was just on WWE.com, and it wasn't even an elimination. It was just, I think the roster was maybe 8 people. It was who was on it? I think the Usos were on it. I think Titus was on it. Darren Young was there. That one guy whose name I can't remember now was on. I know that it doesn't help to say that, but yeah, it was not the best roster of guys that were on that show. But essentially what it was is, when we were there, we even joked that this show would only get canceled when everyone that was on it got fired, because like they'd release people constantly that were on that show. I think Goldust was on it. It was essentially a placeholder where they didn't want to do a full new season of NXT with a whole new set of rookies, because they knew that they were going to be transitioning the show to Full Sail full time. So it was like an 6 to 8 month just placeholder of storylines running in circle, the same guys facing each other every single week. And that's kind of how this feels when you hear that these guys have already had 4 matches and now they're going to have a 2 out of 3 fall. Like, why are people tuning into this each and every week? It becomes really tough to justify this being a weekly program for you, because it's such a small roster and they're just running around in circles. Because as NXT Redemption was for us, I'm sure that this is an afterthought. I'm sure this is something they write in one afternoon a couple days before. Vince maybe looks over it once, and I guarantee you Vince isn't even probably in Gorilla when the show's being shot.
Yeah, judging by like a lot of like Graves would throw in a lot of like UFC references here and there, I would make that same assumption. Up next, we got Perkins and Rich Swann, or at least a video recapping their match from last week. I thought it was a very well put together video recapping their feud, and last week Swann, of course, defeated Perkins and they played it off like it was this kind of friendly rivalry, but Perkins looking very dejected as he loses to Swann after shaking his hand in the match. So we get a match. Rich Swann takes on Mario Connors, somebody who I would assume to be maybe somebody a local hire. Before the bell, TJ Perkins walks down to ringside to watch the match. Connors actually gets some decent offense here. He hits a tilt-a-whirl tornado DDT, which gives him a near fall over Swann. Swann then delivers his roundhouse kick to the head that ultimately came across like a false finish because Connors kicks out of this, and Swann has to deliver a Phoenix Splash for the win. The amount of offense they gave Connors played into the finish here because post-match, Perkins grabs the mic, says he expected more out of someone who beat him last week, and says to Swann that I could have beat this dude in half the time that you did. So, and then Perkins decides to challenge Mario Connors again, but this time it's a beat the clock challenge, and he quickly throws up 3:49 on the clock, which is the time that it took Rich Swann to beat Mario Connors, and says that Swann maybe needs to step up his game, which is a callback to Swann telling Perkins the same about a week ago. So TJP takes on Mario Connors in a beat the clock challenge. Perkins immediately low drop kicks Connors. He looks cocky as he takes his time before going for a knee bar, but as he goes for it, Connors reverses into a small package for two. TJP then just quickly from here recovers, hits the detonation kick for the win in 28 seconds.
Yeah, I thought this was, honestly, it's just a continuation of the NXT Redemption thing I said before. Everything just feels real low stake on this show. Even when you just compare it segment to segment with the stuff with Neville, the stuff with Neville has a particular urgency because we know we're building to a Cruiserweight title match at the next show, and we know that there are going to be updates on this program on Raw. All these other ones just sort of feel like they're in nowhere land. This segment, I can guarantee you, if you took this segment to Vince in a pitch for a Raw segment or a SmackDown segment, you might get fired on the spot. This was an interesting sort of like one-upsmanship sort of a thing, but there was no urgency to it. The stakes were extremely low. We know where this thing's going to go. So the fact that these two who clearly hate each other are attempting to do like a friendly rivalry thing, it just feels real low stakes.
Yeah, I think part of the reason why it kind of feels a little stale is the fact that like we've seen these pairings in such a small, ultimately what is like a small roster. We've seen them for so much, and these two, they kind of played off of their interaction in the CWC, so it's been a full year of kind of the same 6 people interacting with each other, and if you look at just kind of like the top order of people, it's an even smaller group. So as somebody who's even watched 205 Live a lot, this feels like it's not necessarily must-see TV.
Right. Well, it's also a really odd choice that they're just making in terms of the overall philosophy of the show, where it's like, okay, we have these guys. Well, why do we sign them? We sign them because they're amazing athletes and they're incredible workers in the ring. Okay, well, what's their weakness? Their weakness is some of them aren't the best promos and their acting isn't that great. Okay, well, we're going to develop a show where they just act and just cut promos and they only wrestle like everybody else in very short matches. So it's that odd thing that WWE has always had when it comes to their approach to cruiserweights. And you've also seen this in the X Division at times with Vince Russo, where it says, let's take these athletes and let's de-emphasize the things they're not, the things they're great at, and force them to do the things that they're not so great at. And that's what this sort of felt like, where how great would it if this segment had just been dedicated to a 10-minute Rich Swann or TJP match? How much better would that have been than 2 short squash matches and some very forgettable promo exchanges in between?
See, I'm not 100% sure about that, because I just see these two and the star power not meaning a whole lot to this audience that has just watched SmackDown. If it was Full Sail, I think it'd be completely different. But do you think, Brian, that there's anything to the idea that, you need to have a certain level of star power and you need this type of storyline to get people to invest in a longer match?
Well, I think that That is a valid point. I think that is something that I would take a step further and then ask, okay, is this the best way to produce this show? Is the ultimate goal to get these people over in front of these many people at a SmackDown? I would say no, because I don't think these people are necessarily selling merchandise at the event. Maybe going back to the CWC level of doing things would be the right way to do it. I mean, you look at the British show that's being taped and that's going to be debuting on the network. It's being produced in the same way that the British tournament was done, and that was such a big success that they're replicating that. We're not replicating the CWC here. The British show isn't the same 7 British dudes facing each other, after a SmackDown taping. We're keeping them in the environment where they're going to do well, and we're bringing in part-time people. I almost think that if 205 Live could be every month is a different tournament that is shot in Full Sail, and the winner of this tournament gets the next title shot, maybe that might be the way to go. And maybe sometimes a Jack Gallagher wins. Maybe sometimes you bring in a couple, indie dudes who just work a couple different dates. But it's very clear that this structure of doing the show this way just is not working. And I also think that it's very difficult to get an entire roster over from scratch, especially if you're just shoehorning this thing after a taping of SmackDown. Maybe if it was done before, it might have a little bit more hope. But at this point, when you're tired and you've seen the Cenas and you've seen AJ Styles and Kevin Owens and all these people, and none of them are coming back after all of this, it can be really hard to care about any of these people. I think if cruiserweight segments were dispersed throughout the show, like if there's a cruiserweight match in the middle of a SmackDown episode, maybe that would do better. But lumping them all together in one show, this just isn't the way to produce this show for results.
Jack Gallagher's music plays, but it's just Brian Kendrick dressed as Gallagher again. Kendrick says he's sick of people calling Gallagher an unconventional and unorthodox wrestler. Kendrick says Gallagher is neither of those things. He's just a clown. He's a third-rate William Regal. Says he's had to work hard to get here, and somebody like Gallagher has never put in a hard day's work in his entire life. He just makes people laugh. Jack Gallagher appears, says he's been fighting since he was 16, says he knows it's a privilege to be in the WWE, and calls Kendrick out on squandering his first chance in the WWE for being a passive-aggressive git. He says, I have British friends. I've never heard them use that. I looked it up in Urban Dictionary. It does exist. They have a whole different vocabulary there, and maybe the UK tournament will be or the UK show will be a way that they could showcase a lot of this UK slang. Like who is it? Is Jim Ross calling it?
Yeah, it's Jim Ross and Nigel, right?
Jim Ross calling it, I believe, and I'd love to hear Jim Ross use the term "git" or "cheeky Nando's." Anyway, he says that Gallagher says he can talk the talk because he can back it up, and says he'll knock Kendrick's bloody head off if he talks about him that way again. And then he proceeds to punch Kendrick in the face. Kendrick uses his umbrella to beat down Gallagher to get the advantage. Beats the shit out of him with this umbrella. I actually thought it was a set of 2 very good spirited promos from both men. I thought they had the crowd's attention somewhat, but there didn't seem to be much vocal reaction to either man here. So, maybe like both men have just been around for so long now that I think people feel like their time is not necessarily worth investing into it. But I thought 2 good promos though.
Yeah, I thought in a vacuum it was fine. It certainly got a reaction in my living room as I was watching with a friend who could not stop laughing at this, but not in a way that was the type of laughter I think they were hoping to evoke, I would say. I think what hurts this show is the fact that nothing feels urgent, and it doesn't feel like, well, what's earned by winning a feud on this show? If we're ranking is this feud of more importance than the Tozawa Davari match that we saw earlier? Is TJP and Rich Swann more important than Cedric Alexander and Noam Dar? Like, is there a hierarchy here? Is there a pecking order? Or is it just, again, a lot of guys going out and just having segments because that's who, I showed up to work and you're my dance partner for the evening?
pretty much everything falls under the title match. And beyond the title match, I would just say I think the show kind of feels like exactly that. You have, a number of storylines, but nothing that really feels like it's more important than the other. And that takes us to, of course, our main event, an I Quit match featuring Cedric Alexander and Noam Dar. We get a recap of their feud that's been going on for like half a year. The match itself starts. Action spills to the floor early. Cedric is wrestling very aggressively here. He is just sick of being in this storyline, and he knows that a win here or even some type of ending will get him out of it and will help him move on. So Dar gets to show off some of his submission wrestling here, which we don't often get to see because he works a bit more of a comedic character now. But here he twists Cedric's arms back, asks for Cedric to quit, but he doesn't. Cedric removes the protective padding from the body of the turnbuckle itself, slips Dar's fingers into it, and tries to submit him that way. I thought a very creative looking spot, very simple, got a good reaction. Cedric attempts a moonsault off the apron but misses, lands awkwardly on his knee, which Dar begins to target. Cedric shows off a lot of offense here. Tope con hero from Cedric, dive off the announce table from Cedric. Crowd starts to get into it. Cedric traps Dar's arm in a chair, asks Dar to quit multiple times, and each time he says no, steps on the chair to a good reaction. When Dar says no for a third time, Cedric at this point looks Dar in the eye, says this is your last chance, and then proceeds to repeatedly stomp the chair before Dar begs to quit. I thought a good I Quit match from these two.
Yeah, I really liked this match. I thought that, don't want to be a broken record, I thought it was hurt by the same issue that this was coming after SmackDown and also a pretty cold reaction for everything else. But I thought this was pretty well done and was the end of a pretty large storyline as well. So I kind of wished it had been allowed to have a more invested crowd, but I thought they were good. I love that spot you mentioned as well with the fingers and the turnbuckle, almost the point that I kind of was hoping that would be the finish, but I liked it. I thought it was really good, and again, it did at times feel like one hand clapping. It almost felt like I was watching this thing on mute, and you could definitely feel that it might have gotten into a higher level if the audience had been giving anything back. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, they weren't. So I thought it was a very good match that I think could have been great based on who was involved and the fact that this is months in the making, this match here.
It's months in the making, but aside from the fact that the crowd is kind of at this point conditioned not to care about any of these guys, the build itself has been really prolonged and kind of disjointed and sloppy. Not to mention, ultimately this is a comedy feud, I feel. It's just Cedric and Alicia Fox. So Cedric did a great job here, though, of being aggressive. It just didn't necessarily feel earned because we are dealing with a bit of a comedic feud. So maybe that was kind of my assessment of the match. But as a match itself, I thought it was very good. Post-match, Noam Dar grabs the mic. Says he quits. Yes, he quits. Not only does he quit Cedric, he also quits Alicia Fox. Says to Alicia Fox, "Do you think I was really into you? You must be as stupid as you look." He says he signed his WWE contract at the age of 22. A year later, he's the youngest superstar on Raw and 205 Live. Dar says he has plenty of women in every city who want him. Every woman in this arena probably wants him, and says the only reason he chose Alicia was to use her. He thought being with Fox would get him attention in the WWE, and now she's not worth the trouble. And then ends by saying, "You mean nothing to me, Alicia," and then does not finish the Fox and drops the mic. An epic dumping here on 205 Live.
But he did confirm that no one watches this show by flat out saying that he has women in every city across the country. So he wasn't afraid that any of them would see this. That is a very interesting player move. That, okay, I get it, you're dating multiple women in different cities, that's your thing, but that one of them is a televised relationship, I would not have broadcast this, but it is 205 Live, so it is fair to say that none of those other women will ever see this happen.
Good point. Good point. So, I mean, I thought Dar definitely amongst the 205 roster, he's somebody who could talk, and clearly I would assume they have a bit more planned for him post Alicia Fox, but his size and the division he's in certainly limits him. But I feel like he certainly is somebody who has potential to be a great, I guess, mouthpiece in a tag team along with a bigger man, sort of like an Enzo type. Do you have any thoughts on Noam Dar?
Well, I think that could be said for a lot of the guys on this roster. I think that, quite frankly, Rich Swann should be moved out of the Cruiserweight division. I think he could do a lot of stuff. I think a feud with him and The Miz would be fantastic. And Noam Dar, I even though a lot of people probably don't care about this feud, even though a lot of people probably didn't care about this angle at all, that the way that he said Fox has really gotten over as kind of like a kind of meme thing online a little bit. I see it referenced a lot, even though nothing else from this program is. I almost would have saved this breakup for Raw, because this was a really great heel moment for him. I thought it was a really good segment, and it's going to be something that maybe gets recapped, but I don't think people are going to feel it the same way they would have felt it had it happened on Raw, where it probably would have gotten a pretty big reaction from the crowd and would have felt a little bit weightier. Now, I'm not saying you wouldn't necessarily done this I Quit match on Raw, so maybe it was just you postpone it till the next week or something like that. But yeah, I thought that this was a good segment from him. I completely agree. I think he's a great talker. I think he's really great in the ring. I would almost love it if maybe he replaced Enzo for Cass, quite possibly. But the fact that what I would say is probably his best promo moment so far happened as an afterthought on the show no one watches doesn't set him up for the most success.
Well, I'll repeat. I mean, I feel like per minute, I thought there was a bit more storyline weight to 205 Live than SmackDown this week. I almost had as many notes for 205 as I did for SmackDown. But your overall assessment of the evening's programmings, one final time, Brian.
I probably would not do it again. Maybe on a different week. That's the thing that's so crazy about WWE programming is that, unlike, you know, when I tune in to watch Twin Peaks, for example, which is my favorite show on right now, I don't know what I'm going to expect. It's a crazy show. It can go in all sorts of directions, but it's always consistently interesting, and there's stuff to talk about afterwards, and it's only an hour long. Versus this, where it was, I mean, you and I spoke, you know, because obviously we were recapping it, and a lot of things were there to discuss, but this was almost 4 hours of content, and we're both kind of agreeing, not a lot happened. A lot of stuff happened on 205 Live, you know, that we talked about, but it was overall a pretty uneventful evening. So for me, for my entertainment dollar and time spent, WWE just feels like such a risky proposition right now, where who knows, is my time, are they going to respect my time as an audience member? And this just sort of solidified where I'm currently at as a viewer, which is, hey, if I hear about something happening after the fact, I'll check it out. But it just really is not worth the time to sit and watch an entire program right now.
Well, Brian, your perspective is always very appreciated. And we don't have time for feedback this week. I basically forgot to put up the thread. But also,
okay. This is where you talk about Spider-Man, right?
I'd love to have another conversation about Spider-Man, but I think you and I are both running out of time, unfortunately, this evening, or this day, this morning, whatever you want it to be. But before we go, Brian, let us know where people can hear you on Law Radio and where else we can find your stuff.
Yeah, they can hear me in this exact same feed every other Friday, the off weeks from Review Away. It is Keep It 2000. It is the weekly Nitro review podcast with myself and Nate Milton. We're going through and watching every single Raw, every single Nitro from the year 2000. And one of the big things when Nate and I started this project was that we wanted to create a podcast that it just sort of felt timeless. I feel that not too much, but just a lot of the wrestling podcasts now kind of fall into two groups. It's either interviews or it's recaps of current events. And we wanted to create a show that you could just binge and you could just listen at your own pace. We purposely don't make that many topical jokes. I think you can go back and listen to our very first episode that we did, and you can just listen straight through. You can follow all these storylines, and I mean, I'm learning a lot from doing this process. I think a lot of times little moments of WCW 2000 are taken out of context, and we laugh at how terrible they are. And what I'm finding is some things are much worse in context and other things actually kind of make sense. But we just did the big Russo relaunch. We got through the kind of boring Kevin Sullivan days. So now it's craziness, pedal to the metal moving forward. The episode we just did was myself and Robert Karpelis, the man behind WWE Creative-ish and also former WWE writer. And I'll go ahead and announce who our next guest is. Our next guest next week is going to be our first returning guest, Chris Urbanovich, who does the theme song for the show and is also from the band Editors. He's going to be stopping by, and he will also be debuting a new piece of music for the show. Yeah, which it sounds great. I'll send you a sample of it so you can get a heads up on it. But I'm looking forward to everyone hearing that, hearing Chris's return to the show. It's a lot of fun. So if you haven't listened already, go back to the Pro boards and catch up. I mean, we're 15 episodes in, and I think it's a fun show to be able to sit and just be able to listen to all of the shows in order.
Brian and Nate do a great job every single week. And yes, you can go to the Pro Boards if you want to check out all the Keep It 2000s in order. You can also go to liveaudiowrestling.com. Under the shows tab, you could just select Keep It 2000 and you'll have all the episodes laid out for you. Episode 1 all the way till, what are you guys at right now?
Episode 15 is what we just did, and we are on April 10th is where we're at. So the fact we're doing this every other week, I don't think Nate and I really accepted this to be 2 years of our life, but we'll make it. We'll live through it, hopefully.
2 years, wow. I look forward to hearing the beginning and contrasting it to the end in 2 years' time to see how this social experiment has panned out. But thank you again for joining me, Brian. Where can people follow you on Twitter?
Oh, yeah, I'm at Brian Max Man on Twitter and Instagram and pretty much any, sort of avenue there. I've been a lot happier lately, so I don't necessarily complain about wrestling on there as much anymore. So if that's what you're coming for, I'm sorry. But still follow me there and say hey.
Say hey. And thank you, everybody, for joining me. I'll be on, I think okay, so first of all, I think there's What's Next. I'm not sure if there's an MMA report this week. I would maybe assume not, but there could be. You never know. The man might surprise us with a something here and there. But on Friday, I am back with Dan Lavransky as we review the Flair Steamboat trilogy, and we are doing that for this week's Review Away. So if you guys are interested in watching any of those matches, they are considered some of the best of all time. And if you go to lawradio.proboards.com, all the links are there, so do check that out. And follow me, Way0937, at Law Radio. Thank you.